Well, it's nearly winter. It's late afternoon, the wind's blowing in the trees. You can hear the leaves. Now everybody seems to have their knickers in a knot over artificial intelligence. But very few people seem to have their knickers in a knot in about a much more dangerous and important topic: genetic engineering. For the first time in human history, we as human beings have the capacity to alter genes, not just in plants as we've been doing for 20 to 30 years, but in human beings in utero. Now, traditionally, people who exercise authority through history have tried to differentiate themselves from everybody else by the clothes they wore, the colour of the clothes, or even certain physical characteristics. A group in South America, the hereditary ruling classes, used to bind the head, the skull of their small children, so that they grew with an elongated skull, so they were identified as part of that class. In medieval Europe, serfs could not wear coloured clothes. If you did, you were executed. Very simple. We saw with the Roman Catholic Church, purple became the colour of the prince of the churches, and also purple was the colour of the Roman senators, the colour of the clothes, the cloak they wore. So human beings have tended to differentiate themselves on class lines for a long time, since time immemorial. Because obviously, if you wish to exercise authority over other people, they need to understand, especially if it's a large population, when not everybody knows everybody, that you are part of that class that exercises authority. Now, Mr. Huxley in the 1960s wrote a book called A Brave New World. And the interesting idea behind A Brave New World was that the state, or a ruling elite, was actually able to manipulate genes in order to create human beings that were useful for specific tasks. We had the epsilons, which were the base workers. Now, bring the clock forward to 2023, and what was science fiction in the 1960s begins to be reality. As we know, the dilemma with technology and developing technology, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's the World Wide Web, whether it's genetic engineering, is who controls that technology and for what reason is that technology used. Now, I've seen on the frontiers of genetic engineering that the main reason is to actually change genes in utero in order to prevent children being born with specific abnormalities or disabilities, which would make their life much more difficult. But the dilemma is, this concept is related to the eugenics craze, which was huge in the 1920s and 1930s. The Hitler Nazi dream to create a blue-eyed blonde masterclass to rule the planet. Now obviously they attempted to do that by selective breeding of human beings. And there were examples during Nazi Germany of selective breeding, and obviously people with disabilities, people with the wrong political attitude, people with the wrong colour, the wrong religious belief, were to be exterminated in order to purify the race. Now in 2023 we are faced with a dilemma, not just about artificial intelligence but also about genetic engineering. We lost the battle regarding the World Wide Web. When the World Wide Web was created in the 1980s and early 1990s, it was supposed to be an instrument which empowered individuals, an instrument which broke down sovereign borders, an instrument which made knowledge available to everyone. And what we've seen over the last 40 years is the exact opposite happening. We've seen the space now being dominated by large corporations, and in many cases these corporations are so large they're much more powerful than sovereign nation states, and sovereign nation states' attempts to manage their behaviour have been largely ineffective. So the issue isn't the technology, the issue is who controls the technology. And it's not just a matter of what the technology can and cannot do. It's about who controls that technology. Is it technology which will be used by everyone to improve the situation? Or is it technology which will be used by a small minority to dominate the planet? And what genetic engineering does, it gives the rich and powerful, not all of them will obviously take this up, the ability to bypass the normal mixing of DNA which occurs in procreation. And they could have, and we are talking about it today, about designer babies. Not just designer babies in terms to remove genetic abnormalities which may create difficulties for that child as they grow up, but designer babies with particular abilities which would enshrine that individual's offspring as superior beings, human beings, who would then be able to dominate the planet. I know it sounds far-fetched, but in 1960, the Brave New World sounded far-fetched. And in the 1930s, 1984 sounded far-fetched. And 40 years ago, the idea of the World Wide Web and the way it's been manipulated sounded far-fetched. And having a mobile phone that's basically a computer in your hand sounded far-fetched. So the issue isn't technology or technological innovation. The issue is, the central issue is who controls that technology. Is it controlled by a central authority, the state? Is it controlled by people who have access to expendable, disposable income which they can use to improve their progeny's characteristics? Is it controlled by the community as a whole. So, whether it's artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, the World Wide Web, or another technological innovation which is around the corner, the issue is the same. Who controls that technology? Are there mechanisms by which to ensure that technological innovation doesn't become the private property of a small group of people, or becomes this property of a state apparatus which will then use that technology, as we've seen with facial recognition, to exercise control over the people they control. Ultimately, it's important that we are not blinded by the technological innovation. What I mean by that is, it may sound a good thing, but the reality is, what is a good thing for the community as a whole may not be a good thing when it's controlled by a corporation or the state or a handful of individuals. And that's the dilemma that we face as a species as we outgrow our physical bodies and we outgrow our reproductive processes and we outgrow the limitations which nature has placed on us. Now obviously there aren't technological innovations for every human problem, and in many regards the problems which we face today in 2023, like the climate emergency, population growth, shrinking resources, an economic system based on profits for profit's sake, can to a significant degree be linked to technological innovations. That doesn't mean that technological innovations are bad. Obviously many technological innovations which we are able to use today make life much easier for the great majority of the people. So that's the ultimate dilemma that we face. Not technological innovations, even if it's something has got far-reaching consequences as artificial intelligence or genetic engineering. But who controls that process? Who controls that process? Can we allow this type of technological innovation to become a creature of the marketplace, where the highest bidder is the only person who can actually use that innovation to expand their control over others and expand their wealth? Is it the plaything of a centralised government which can pass legislation to create Huxley's brave new world? Although some people say that with artificial intelligence we actually don't need to genetically manipulate people. But in many regards, if you are in a position of exercising authority and you want to maintain that authority for generations, if you control a population which no longer has the desire for change, which will accept the status quo, well then things don't change. So how do we resolve this issue? Do we resolve this issue by centralising power in fewer and fewer hands? Obviously not. Do we resolve this issue by leaving power in the hands of a parliamentary representative democracy? Representatives have the power to make laws for the rest of the population, not on behalf of that population, as we see consistently in Australia, one of the richest sovereign nation states on the planet, a nation state that can't even resolve the issue of childhood poverty, because parliamentary decisions are not made, they're made ultimately by representatives, but the type of parliamentary decisions are made are those which reinforce the power of those who continue to exercise power. Or do we create a new society which breaks down hierarchy, which removes the ability of the state and individuals to control the lives of billions of people? I'm talking about direct democracy, not representative democracy, an amoeba in democratic evolutionary theory. But I'm talking about direct democracy, where the people involved in decision make that decision and then appoint or elect delegates to coordinate those decisions at a local, regional, national, international level. A system of democracy based on delegation, where delegates need to return to the people who gave them that original mandate to have that mandate reaffirmed once a coordinated decision by the delegates has been agreed to. It's a society where wealth is held in common and used for the common good, not for the benefit of a minority. And while we continue to support a private investment for private profit world, and while we continue to support a state apparatus with a centralised economy, the problems that artificial intelligence and genetic engineering and any new technological innovation the problems we may face as a result of these innovations will not change. Ultimately, the issue isn't the innovation. Ultimately, the issue is who makes decisions, how decisions are made, whether wealth is held in common, whether we can break down what gives individuals and small groups of people the power to determine the lives of millions, the power to use genetic engineering to suit their agenda. And that's inequalities in power and wealth. If you're interested in these concepts, I encourage you to go to the Public Interest Before Corporate Interests webpage. You can join today. You can join online. Go to pibci.net. Who knows what we'll talk about next week.